So this is why your students leave. As a language teacher, students will come and go, and they can come and go for good reasons or for bad reasons. Today, I'm gonna tell you about the main bad reasons why they leave, so that you can pay attention to that, fix your mistakes, and keep your students for longer. Of course, there can be several reasons why your students leave, but I want to not only talk to you about the problems, I also want to mention the solutions, what you can do about it. That's why I'm only going to talk about 5 things in this video. The first one is your students may leave because you refuse to adapt. Sometimes we get some students and we apply some sort of strategy with them. And then, because we are successful with that strategy, we are led to think that is the one strategy you have to use with everybody. And then you try to force that same strategy into every student you work with, even when that might not be the best strategy for that specific student. It turns out that students are people, and as such, everyone is very different. So one strategy that you apply with one student might not work with others. And you must be both attentive and adaptable. Attentive because you need to be able to see on your student's face when your strategy is not working, either on his face or on his results or on what he tells you. Many times the student tells you that it's not working, and you have to be adaptable because you have to be able to change strategies when you realize yours is not working by any of those means. So be careful with applying the same strategy for every student, giving the same type of class to all the students, because it does not work for everybody. You are going to find students who have problems that no other student has. Some students have pronunciation problems. Others have a huge problem understanding a grammar topic. For example, most of my students are Brazilian, and here in Brazil, we do not have anything similar to the present perfect. And so it's very hard for Brazilians to understand that. However, in Spanish, they have something similar to the present perfect. So I cannot apply the same strategy for Spanish speakers and Portuguese speakers because they are not in the same level of understanding that specific topic. Because in one language there is, in the other language there isn't. So that's one example. The second reason why your students may leave, it's on the thumbnail of this video, right? You create too many excuses. You are not professional enough, you are not diligent enough, and you keep canceling your classes, rescheduling your classes, creating excuses as to why you need to postpone a class or why you're not going to teach that guy today and why you need to reschedule to the next week. So this is extremely unprofessional. But this needs to be said, even though it looks obvious, because I used to do that a lot, okay? Just remember that every time you miss a class or you cancel a class, your student has like a level of tolerance, and every time you do something like that, you chip away from that tolerance bar they have, and at some point they are gonna get fed up with you. They will have had enough of you canceling classes, and they're not gonna work with you anymore because they do not think you are a professional person. And if you do those things, you aren't a professional. That is not to say that you can't ever cancel or reschedule a class. Yesterday, I literally missed a class because I slept too much. Yesterday. Do you know what I told my student? Man, I am sorry I missed our class because I overslept. Would you be willing to reschedule for later today? And the guy said yes. He said yes, and he was very chill about that because he said, and I'm gonna actually show you the message. He said that I have many points with him because he is a guy that many times needs to reschedule a class, or he has something that comes up at work and he needs to change times. And I'm always very flexible with him with that. And so when I slip, he can forgive me very easily because I do the same to him. So you need to be flexible with your students so that they can be flexible with you when you slip. But you cannot make a habit out of rescheduling and canceling classes. That is ugly, that is very unprofessional, that is very frustrating to your students, and that is going to give you a bad reputation. Because when somebody asks your student, oh, do you have any language teacher to recommend? They're gonna say, look, I have this guy, the only problem is that he cancels classes a lot. So look for others first. Like, leave this guy as a last resource if you don't find anybody else. Like, you do not want to have that reputation. That is a horrible, horrible reputation to have. And once your reputation is sullied that way with one student, it's almost impossible to recover your image with that specific student. So if you have made this mistake in the past, don't beat yourself over it. Just do not do it again. Do not cancel, do not reschedule classes. Are you sick? Teach. Is it a holiday? Teach. Do you have to miss a party? Teach. Are you going to arrive late at the family dinner? Teach. Do not cancel classes, at least unless it is extremely necessary. Unless it's a life or death situation. Do not cancel. Be professional. The third reason why your students leave is that you probably talk too much. And it's funny hearing this from me, because all I do on this channel is yap about languages, right? But on your classes, if you talk too much, if you do not give enough time for your students to try and practice and talk, you are robbing them from practice. You are gonna become a bore. There's only so much somebody can listen before they start to zone out. So try to keep your talk and your explaining to a minimum and let the student talk. Sometimes, and I used to make this mistake a lot when I was, many years ago, when I was starting my career as an English teacher. The student made a mistake and I would correct the student right away, right on the spot, right then and there. I stopped doing that because many times when you don't correct the students immediately after they make a mistake, many times they are able to see themselves the mistake they made and they correct themselves, which is much better because they start developing some sort of autonomy when it comes to speaking and correcting their own mistakes. So do not correct a student on every single mistake they make, especially if it's a mistake you realize they're making for the first time. Wait until they make that same mistake like twice or maybe 3-4 times. When you see it's a consistent, repetitive mistake, then you correct it. Because sometimes when we are talking, we miss prepositions, we forget verbs, we forget words in our second, in our third language, and even in our mother tongues too. That happens to me all the time. Many times my mind works faster than my mouth, so the words that I'm thinking of do not come out the way I want. And so I have to take a breather to fix my own mistakes. You probably see me doing this sometimes during my videos. So that is normal, everybody does that. So give your students time to breathe, time to talk, keep your explanation and correction to the essential minimum. Ideally, in a class, your students should be talking more than you. And this is a very interesting exercise. I recommend you set 2 timers when you start your next class. One timer is gonna be for your yapping. The other timer is gonna be for the student when the student is talking. And then when the student starts talking, you start his timer and pause when they are done. When you start talking, you start your timer and pause it when you are done. And by the end of the class, you should have a very clear image of who is talking more, who talked more during the class. Even if you have a very basic student, you should not be yapping. The student should always be talking more than you. This is a rule. This is a guideline. This is what you want to achieve. You will probably not be able to achieve this every single class, especially because some students talk more than others. Maybe the student's in a bad day and then don't want to talk very much, which happens. But like in most of your classes, like 90% of your classes, your students should be talking more than you. And this is actually linked to the fourth reason why your students leave, is that you forget to teach. Sometimes we become friends with our students and we start having off-topic conversations, even in our mother tongues instead of the target language we want. And that happens. It's normal, especially when you become friends with your students. That's what I like to do. I think I have mentioned this in a couple videos ago, that I like becoming friends with my students. I mentioned that in my last video. Like that's the type of rock that I am, right? That I like to be a friendly person, and I like to become friends with my students. I like to go out and have lunch with them. I like to meet them whenever I can. Now, this is a fine line we are threading, because we have to be careful not to forget to teach. And this really happens. Sometimes you become friends with a student and you start talking about whatever, and you forget that you were in a class. You forget that you have a duty to that person. You have a duty to teach them the language they want. You have a service to provide that person. And it's very easy to forget that. And I have heard this before. Every time I get a new student, in the task class I give them, I ask them, why did you stop working with your last teacher? So that I don't make the same mistakes, right? And more than once, I have heard, my teacher became too much of a friend, and many times we just talked and she forgot to teach. And we didn't actually have a class. That's why I had to stop working with her. This is bad. Your students are gonna leave because of that. So, do you have to be friendly? You don't have to. Can you? Absolutely, you can. I like to be, but do not forget that they are a student and you are a teacher. If you really want to talk to your student a lot, maybe send them a message after class, or ask them out for lunch, for instance. You pay their lunch, for instance, and then you can have all sorts of conversation you want. But when you are in a class, do not forget you're in a class. And finally, the last reason why your students leave is because they already achieved what they wanted. You see, this is not totally 100% bad, because it's a good sign if your student got what they wanted in the first place. If they got the job they wanted, if they got the interview they wanted, if they did the presentation they were preparing for, whatever their first objective was, if they achieved it, they might leave. And that is not horrible. But there are ways of keeping your student even after they achieve what they wanted. All you have to do is be sure that you always have more to teach. Show your student that the objective they got is not the end of the line. There is always more we can learn. There is always more you can achieve. You can always write better. You can always speak more clearly. You can always use better vocabulary. You can always repeat less words. I am repeating always a lot in this case. Maybe I should look into that. That's what I'm talking about, you know? You always have more to teach your student. You have never taught everything you know, right? So you can always teach more. But that is only possible if you, as a language speaker, is always improving as well. If you think that your level of knowledge is enough, then you have no way of keeping students that have already achieved their goals. You have to be constantly improving, finding new strategies, finding new material, improving your language yourself, or maybe even learning other languages, so you put yourself in your students' shoes so that you can feel things from their perspective. Because when we are teachers for a long time, we kind of forget what being a student is like. And so sometimes it's important to be in the student's position every now and again. I am doing that with Italian right now. I have an Italian teacher with whom I work every week, and then I see, I pay attention at the difficulties I have with Italian, and I can kind of transfer that to my students and the difficulties they might have with English, and I try to tackle those obstacles. So you have to be constantly improving as a language speaker, as a professional teacher, to be able to keep the students that have already achieved their goals. So that's it. So the reasons why your students leave, right? Perhaps you refuse to adapt your teaching. Perhaps you create too many excuses, you give too many excuses, you cancel too many classes. Perhaps you talk too much and you forget to give your student time to practice. Perhaps you forget to teach. You became friends with your student and you keep talking to them about off-topic stuff and you forget you're in a class. Or maybe your student already got what they wanted. And because you haven't improved yourself enough, you do not have anything more to give them. You have no way of convincing them to stay with you. So these are the 5 reasons why they probably leave. So focus on those reasons, and I guarantee that if you figured that you have any of those problems and you apply the fixes that I mentioned, you will have a greater student retention. It's funny because everything that I told you here today are problems that I had. I had all of these 5 problems. I swear to God. Fortunately, God was kind enough to show me the wrong stuff that I was doing, so I was able to fix it. So be humble too, so that you can see your mistakes and fix them, because that's gonna turn you into a more successful language teacher. That's it. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my next upload. And if you liked this video, click on the like button so I know you are out there and you like this type of video. That's it for today. Thank you very much, and I see you in the next video. And as always, let's make a living out of language.